The disappearance, it was a chilly but otherwise uneventful spring morning in the quiet rural community of Lansdowne, Pictou County, Nova Scotia. Nestled along Gairloch Road, the Sullivan family's home sat in near solitude, surrounded by thick woodland, rusted fences, and old country trails that had remained unchanged for generations. But on the morning of May 2nd, 2025, the ordinary rhythm of this peaceful place was shattered when 6-year-old Lily Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack disappeared without a trace the morning like any other. Their mother, Maggie Sullivan, had last seen them playing near the back of their home. It was the kind of place where children could still roam freely. Lily was the spirited older sister, creative, always singing, and Jack followed close behind, quieter, clutching a small plush bear that he refused to part with. According to Maggie, the children had asked to play outdoors after breakfast. She agreed, as she often did, trusting the familiar surroundings, but minutes turned into a half hour, then an hour. The sun rose higher in the sky, but the children did not return. Initially calm, Maggie's concern quickly escalated to panic. She searched the house, checked the old shed, and called out into the trees. No answer. By the time her partner, Daniel Martel, returned from a short errand in nearby New Glasgow, Maggie was already in tears. The call to the police was made at 9:47 a.m. Within the hour, the RCMP were on scene. Officers canvassed the property while Maggie and Daniel described what the children had been wearing. Lily in a pale blue jacket with yellow rubber boots, Jack in green overalls, and a faded red cap. The clothes were painted with vivid pictures that would be circulated across the province within hours. The initial search, the early assumption was logical, even hopeful. The children had wandered off. This was rural Canada, dense forests, overgrown trails, hidden gullies, so search crews focused on a lost child scenario. The community responded in full force. Neighbors, fire departments, forestry officials, and even volunteers from nearby Antigonish and Truro assembled into rotating teams. For 3 days straight, searchers combed through fields, marshes, and wooded terrain. Drones flew overhead. K-9 units traced scents that often stopped abruptly near tree lines. Divers were brought in to examine nearby wells and bogs. A team was dispatched to old, unstable mine shafts that had been abandoned decades. No footprints. No discarded items. No trail. It was as if Lily and Jack had vanished into the earth. The emotional toll as daylight faded each evening. The Sullivan property transformed into something surreal. Command tents lit the yard. Helicopters occasionally circled overhead. Reporters stood at the end of Gairloch Road, watching as law enforcement quietly consulted maps and radios. Inside the home, Maggie was reportedly inconsolable. Friends later told reporters that she hadn't eaten or slept. Photos of the children, taped to walls and refrigerator doors, took on an eerie significance. She was just staring at the door, waiting for them to come in, one neighbor recalled. Like they were going to walk back in and everything would be fine. Daniel Martel, the children's stepfather, appeared stoic, though officers noted he remained cooperative throughout the initial phase of the investigation. Interviews were conducted, timelines reconstructed. Police asked Maggie and Daniel separately to walk through their recollections again and again. It was during this time, days 4 through 7, that the tone began to subtly shift. Too quiet, too clean. The total absence of evidence concerned investigators. Searchers hadn't found so much as a sock. RCMP Corporal Sandy Matheru, speaking later, described it as one of the most difficult cases her unit had ever faced. She hinted that what made it so troubling wasn't just the stakes, it was how little the scene was giving them. There's a difference between a child wandering off and something else, she said. We weren't finding signs of the former. We had to prepare for the latter. Detectives noted that Jack, only 4, was unlikely to travel far without his sister or some type of trail. Similarly, neither child was dressed for extensive time outdoors. The terrain was dense and dangerous in parts, yet no torn clothing, no drop in body temperature via infrared drones, no wildlife alerts. Nothing. RCMP officials expanded their investigation. They called in specialized units, including behavioral analysts, digital forensics experts, and investigators from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. The property was swept again, not just outdoors, but inside. Warrants were quietly processed. Devices were seized. Communication logs reviewed. The Sullivans' home was no longer just the center of a search. It had become a potential crime scene. Community speculation, the lack of public updates from police, only intensified the rumors. Online forums began buzzing with theories, some cruel, others desperate. Many asked, why would two children vanish in broad daylight without anyone seeing anything? More pressing still, why weren't RCMP revealing whether they suspected abduction? The RCMP remained guarded in their statements. "We are not ruling anything out," Corporal Matheru said at a press briefing on May 8th. All investigative avenues are being explored. Meanwhile, the family issued no direct public appeals. That, too, sparked commentary. Experts have noted in similar cases, like that of Madeline McCann or Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow, public behavior often becomes scrutinized, even unfairly so, when children go missing. But investigators, while careful, take these signs seriously. Still, no arrests, no suspects, just silence. A haunting anniversary. By May 16th, 2 weeks had passed. A vigil was held outside a local church, where townspeople lit candles and tied yellow ribbons around posts. At the front of the congregation, a table displayed a drawing Lilly had made the week before she vanished, a picture of her family, smiling. Beneath a blue sky, stick figures holding hands. The drawing broke many hearts. And yet, despite hundreds of volunteer hours, over 50 interviews, and intense technological investigation, there were still no signs of the Sullivan children there. Names faded from nightly news cycles, but not from the minds of those searching for them. Behind the scenes, investigators pushed forward, their strategies slowly evolving. This was no longer just a missing persons case. The investigation enters criminal terrain almost 3 weeks after Lilly and Jack Sullivan vanished from their home. On May 2nd, 2025, the tone of the investigation shifted dramatically. What began as a desperate search for missing children evolved into a full-fledged criminal inquiry, driven by expert intervention, ground realities, and the changing posture of the RCMP. 1. The expert alert. The turning point became evident during a global news segment that featured a former Halifax investigator who left no room for doubt. He asserted the disappearance of the Sullivan siblings had become a criminal investigation. The declaration drew immediate public attention, encouraging observers to take stock of the seriousness behind every investigatory step. 2. Declaring a criminal investigative posture unlike a standard missing child case. Authorities began employing tactics characteristic of criminal probes. Behavioral and criminal profilers were stationed on-site, dissecting behavioral patterns and family dynamics. Forensics teams swept every inch of the home and surrounding grounds, with fresh eyes, focusing on potential crime scene markers, soil, fibers, and digital footprints. Voluntary polygraph screenings began appearing in media coverage, notably including Lilly and Jack's stepfather, Daniel Martel, who reportedly volunteered for the test. These layers of investigative effort deviated significantly from an ordinary missing child operation, signaling a calculated shift into deeper scrutiny. 3. The polygraph effect. A polygraph isn't merely a truth-detecting machine. It's a psychological lever. It's meant to trigger caution, provoke details, and often unsettle the truthful and deceptive alike. When Daniels Martel and others sat for these tests, it wasn't just about pass/fail, it was about what emerged. In the gaps, admission of overlooked details, emotional shifts, chance omissions. The former Halifax cop explained, this has become a criminal investigation that launched a process runner much like David versus Goliath, where every statement is weighed, evaluated, and contextualized. 4. Evidence, or an ominous lack thereof. What drove the pivot from missing persons to criminal? Investigators began confronting the most chilling of possibilities. There were no traces of the children, no footprints in mud or snow, no items left behind, no toys, no jacket straps, no gloves, no signs of forced entry or struggle in and around the property. It was this unnerving absence of any natural explanation that forced the authorities to escalate. 5. Nationwide collaboration. Once the tone changed, the roster of participants expanded. The National Center for Missing Persons provided protocol and logistical support. The Canadian Centre for Child Protection offered expertise in child behavior and strategies for public engagement. that RCMP major. Crime specialists joined local officers, reinforcing the criminal nature of the case. This multi-tiered alignment signaled high-stakes collaboration, an indicator that the case was no longer treated as a simple disappearance, but a possible abduction or worse. Point 6. Interview strategy intensifies. By now, 50-plus individuals had been interviewed: neighbors, family friends, delivery personnel, anyone who interacted with the children or recent visitors to the property. The focus was not just on who saw what, but whether anyone's story clashed with another's. Investigators cross-referenced phone logs and social media accounts. Searches for suspicious digital communications or location data were conducted. Interviews became iterative, revisited, re-examined, reanalyzed. Point 7. Digging into motive and opportunity. Every criminal investigation depends on two key elements: motive and opportunity. Motive: why would anyone want to harm or abduct two young children? Detectives explored family dynamics, financial stressors, custody disputes, and community tensions. Opportunity: could someone have approached the children during that short window outside their home? Was there a vehicle? Did any unusual visitors pass by? That line of questioning had detectives tapping into rural satellite footage, canvassing vehicles in the area, and reviewing delivery routes for anomalies. Point 8. The weight of not ruling anything out. At one dramatic press briefing, RCMP Corporal Sandy Matthews stated, "We are not ruling anything out. All investigative avenues are being explored." This phrasing deliberately indicated that investigators were prepared to consider foul play even in the absence of direct evidence, a precondition for a criminal investigation. Point 9. Public perception and media pressure. Since the case shifted, media reports took a sharper tone. Headlines went from "search intensifies" to "investigation enters criminal phase," nudging the narrative from hopeful rescue to forensic looking for answers. That increased pressure on investigators, but also turned the lenses more critical. Public funding for search efforts leaned toward criminal intelligence and clues, not just volunteer searches. Point 10. The hard calculation: time versus evidence. Typically, time is the greatest enemy in criminal inquiries. But there's a paradox. The deeper the forensic work, the longer it takes to go through. Polygraph analysis isn't instantaneous. The nuances of physiological responses require expert interpretation. Behavioral analysts must observe suspect demeanor, stress markers, and consistency over time. Digital forensics require legal warrants and may take weeks or months to comb through phones, computers, cloud data. But one thing became clear: those long days of searching with no results had already done the impossible. They'd changed everything about how this case was classified and how it moved forward. Narrative contrast in missing persons cases. Hope is the beating heart. Investigators emphasize optimism, urging the public to keep watching, to call in with sightings. But in criminal cases, hope morphs into scrutiny. All evidence must be harvested. No sentiment can cloud. Every person's action and word come under a microscope. Even well-meaning bystanders are re-interviewed for inconsistencies. That shift from compassionate hope to clinical investigation is palpable in Sullivan's case. It's felt in the presence of detectives asking the same questions a dozen times. It's in the sudden arrival of meth labs, forensic vehicles, and polygraph charts. It's also in the chilling silence left behind by the absence of traces from the children. Looking ahead with this new posture in mind, investigators are now preparing for the next phase: forensic analysis of interviews and polygraphs, behavioral assessments to detect deception or error patterns, legal processes to obtain search warrants for digital devices or properties, refined canvassing based on emerging vehicles, houses, or persons of interest from the perspective of policing veteran agents. This is where the real work begins. No longer lost in the trees, investigators are now constructing meticulous timelines, echoing with questions like, who knew what and when? With every trace of evidence or lack thereof, it appears more probable that Lilly and Jack's disappearance is not accidental. That grim realization is precisely why police have assumed criminal posture, signaling survivors, suspects, and the justice system. We are looking for answers in dark places. High-tech eyes and hidden trails, the digital and forensic hunt. As the Sullivan children's disappearance moved from a missing persons search to a suspected criminal investigation, The Royal Canadian Mounted Police began tapping into a new arsenal of tools, one designed less for finding people lost in the woods and more for uncovering secrets buried in data, silence, and behavior. The digital era leaves traces, footprints, no longer in dirt, but in code, pings, metadata, and silence. By the fourth week of the investigation, search parties had dwindled. Command tents were still pitched on the Sullivan property, but their purpose had changed. No longer was the focus on maps and walkie-talkies, but on laptops, hard drives, call logs, GPS coordinates, and behavioral assessments. The woods had been scoured. Now, the investigation turned inward, digital forensics. Reconstructing invisible timelines. RCMP digital forensics teams began with the family's devices. For cell phones, 2 laptops, and a home desktop computer were collected from the Sullivan household. Using forensic extraction software, officers retrieved deleted texts, location history, call logs, browser searches, and cloud backups. They were looking for any activity in the critical 90-minute window between when the children were last seen and when the 911 call was made. Around 8:15 a.m. to 9:45 a.m. on May 2, investigators focused on any sudden deletion of messages or app history. GPS tracking data showing suspicious movements, connections to known people of concern, unusual browsing behavior, i.e., searches about child disappearance, police procedures, or deleting digital footprints. The presence or conspicuous absence of location data from Maggie Sullivan and Daniel Martel's devices during that period became a key area of scrutiny. The silence that spoke volumes, one officer later described the family's phone activity as a suspiciously blank. For over an hour, neither Maggie nor Daniel's phones had connected to cell towers. No texts were sent, no calls made, no data used. An unusual silence during the time of a growing emergency. This silence added to investigators' concerns. Had the phones been turned off deliberately? Was the home situated in a cell dead zone? Or were they tampered with? To test signal strength, officers brought the same phone models to the home, walking the property to simulate signal coverage. They found no service dead zones that could explain a total loss of digital trail. Behavioral analysis. Watching the unseen while digital teams scoured code, behavioral profilers were watching something far more analog. Body language. They reviewed hours of footage from police interviews, press briefings, and even roadside conversations captured by media cameras. Trained in micro-expression analysis and deception detection, profilers analyzed facial tics or twitches, i.e. movement, hand positioning changes. In tone when discussing specific events, their goal wasn't to catch someone lying in a Hollywood-style reveal. It was to spot inconsistencies, stress reactions, or subtle signs that might help refine interview strategies or suggest contradictions worth pursuing. That a profiler familiar with the case later told a CBC journalist off record. "We don't make accusations, but we do build pressure, and pressure makes cracks." Geographic profiling and movement mapping. Investigators worked with a geo-profiling unit, often used in serial crimes or abductions, to reconstruct possible movement patterns. Using a combination of GPS pings, license plate readers from neighboring towns, and rural trail data, they mapped all known vehicle activity within a 10-kilometers radius of the Sullivan home from the hours of 7:00 a.m. to 11:00 am. One vehicle of interest was noted traveling on a back forestry road that connects Lansdowne to an old, disused sawmill site. The vehicle had no registered destination and no known connection to the family. It was logged by an old hunting trail camera set up by a nearby resident. Investigators began searching for the vehicle and any known associates who might have been in the area. The role of artificial intelligence for the first time in a major Nova Scotia investigation. The RCMP partnered with a private AI crime analytics firm based in Ottawa. Their system, built to assist with child abduction and human trafficking cases, was fed raw data from the case. Timelines, phone metadata, social media profiles, facial images, license plate databases, and search history. The AI's job was to cross-correlate, to find patterns in behavior, link anomalies, and suggest overlooked leads. Among its early outputs, a list of 20 contacts who had messaged either Maggie or Daniel within the past 90 days and then blocked or deleted them 3 accounts. Flagged for suspicious private messages about child safety. Custody or unexplained travel. A deleted Reddit account once linked to the Sullivan family's Wi-Fi that had posted about disappearing without a trace 6 months prior, though circumstantial. These data points built a web that suggested the case was not random. The psychological toll. Cracking under pressure as investigators returned repeatedly with fresh warrants and new questions. Tension inside the Sullivan home reportedly escalated as a neighbor observed Daniel Martel smoking alone outside nightly, pacing back and forth, ignoring greetings. Maggie had all but withdrawn from the outside world, answering no calls, speaking to no reporters, often retreating to the children's rooms, which had been left untouched since May 1. Local media described the home as a site frozen in time. Backpacks on hooks, cereal bowls in the sink, coloring books spread across the floor. But no children. A family under the microscope. Though RCMP has not named any suspects publicly, both Maggie and Daniel were reportedly required to submit updated DNA samples, not just to eliminate their presence from household forensic material, but to compare against trace samples found during deeper inspection. An undisclosed biological trace. Suspected blood on a child's sock found at the base of a ravine 3 kilometers from the home was sent to the RCMP National Forensic Lab in Ottawa for analysis. Results were pending, but if the blood matched one of the children, it could be the first concrete evidence tying their disappearance to a criminal act. Reconstructing the last day. By now, police had reconstructed the morning of May 2nd with as many details as possible. 7:15 a.m. Daniel leaves for a supply run. Caught on gas station CCTV. 8:05 a.m. Maggie reports seeing the children near the back shed. 9:45 a.m. 911 call made. Maggie says the children are gone. 9:50 a.m. 10:30 a.m. First RCMP officers arrive. Search begins. Yet between 8:05 and 9:45, a 100-minute gap, no one besides Maggie was documented interacting with the children. There was no delivery, no visitor, no emergency call. It was as if, investigators privately noted, the children were gone long before the call was made. The unspoken possibilities. As the 5th week approached, the community was no longer asking, what happened? But who knows what happened? Theories swirled, some hopeful, others sinister. Could the children be alive, hidden somewhere by someone with custody motivations? Or had they stumbled onto something terrible, something someone needed to cover up? The longer the silence, the darker the suspicions grew. The threshold of breakthrough. RCMP sources quietly confirmed that 2 new warrants were being executed by week's end, one involving a rural cabin owned by a relative of Daniel Martel, another involving cloud backups from a messaging app popular for encrypted conversations. One officer told reporters, "We're close to something. We just don't know what it is yet." The Sullivan children were still missing, but the hunt was no longer blind. It was now strategic, analytical, and increasingly aggressive. And it was closing in. A town divided. Fear, rumors, and public pressure. As May turned into June, the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan no longer felt like a private family tragedy. It had grown into something bigger, more consuming, more volatile. What began as an urgent search had ignited something raw in the town of Lansdowne, Nova Scotia. The kids were still gone. The RCMP had yet to name a suspect. No one had been arrested. But in the vacuum left behind, fear rushed in. And fear gave way to something even more dangerous: suspicion. Lansdowne, a close-knit rural community of just under 800 people, was beginning to tear at the seams. A town in shock. Lily was 9. Jack was 6. Everyone in town knew them, even if not personally, then by sight. They played soccer at the church field on weekends. Their school photos had once been stapled to the bulletin board at the local bakery. That's why their disappearance hit like a rupture. In a place where everyone trusted their neighbors, the idea that 2 kids could vanish without a trace was incomprehensible. For weeks, people held out hope. Candlelight vigils were organized. Homemade flyers clung to telephone poles despite the rain. Children chalked the sidewalks with messages like, "Come home, Jack," and "We miss you, Lily." But by the end of May, those hopeful signs started to fade, washed away not just by weather, but by the creeping realization that this wasn't going to end like a feel-good rescue story. This was beginning to look like something worse. The Whisper Network with no official updates. A parallel investigation took hold. One made up of whispered conversations in grocery aisles, Facebook threads riddled with speculation, and YouTube live streams hosted by true crime sleuths hundreds of miles away. Who failed the polygraph? Why did no one hear a car? How could they just disappear? Theories sprouted like weeds. Some blamed the parents. Others accused neighbors. A few pointed fingers at teachers, delivery drivers, even hikers passing through. Someone in town had done something. The logic went, and everyone began wondering who. A single unverified post about Daniel Martel's strange behavior at a gas station was shared nearly 2,000 times within 48 hours. Another anonymous user claimed Maggie Sullivan had previously left her children alone to party. That post gained hundreds of comments before being deleted. Too late to stop the damage, one resident told a local reporter. It's like the whole town has turned into a courtroom, and everyone's a suspect. Fear changes everything. Fear made people paranoid. Doors that had once been left unlocked were now bolted tight. Parents stopped letting their kids walk to the park. A summer fair was postponed indefinitely, and an overnight camping event was canceled until further notice. The local school reported a spike in absences. One teacher said, "Some of the younger kids are scared they'll be next. They think someone is taking children." Businesses felt the chill, too. The owner of the Lansdowne Cafe said attendance dropped nearly 40% in the last 2 weeks of May. She blamed it on a simple fact. People don't want to sit down and make small talk when no one trusts each other anymore. The Martel-Sullivan divide, at the center of it all stood the children's parents, Maggie Sullivan and her common-law partner, Daniel Martel. In the earliest days of the search, the town had rallied behind them. But that support fractured the moment the RCMP's posture shifted to criminal. Though authorities never officially named either of them as suspects, their behavior drew heavy scrutiny. Daniel had always kept to himself. Now he barely left the house. When he did, he wore sunglasses and avoided eye contact. Maggie, once active in the local parent council, stopped returning calls. She declined interviews, stopped attending vigils, and even avoided her own sister, who lived just a town over. This behavior screamed guilt. Others, it was grief. But either way, it was divisive. Two camps began to form. One believed the parents were hiding something. The other insisted they were victims of public persecution. The RCMP's silence only worsened the split. The online onslaught, it wasn't just local. Internet sleuths across Canada, and even some from the US, latched onto the case. Reddit threads dissected the Sullivan family's social media presence. YouTube crime commentators speculated about motives, body language, and timelines, some racking up hundreds of thousands of views. One video titled, "Did the Parents Do It?" featured a slowed-down clip of Daniel looking away during a press conference. The host paused it repeatedly, claiming it was a classic sign of deceit. Another video claimed that Maggie's social media smile pattern changed a month before the disappearance. None of this was verified. Most of it was garbage. But in a town already on edge, those theories bled into real conversations. The IT was trial by algorithm. Law enforcement under fire. RCMP officials, meanwhile, tried to walk a tightrope. They remained tight-lipped about potential suspects, citing operational integrity. But the silence only bred more rumors. A packed town hall on June 3rd. Tensions boiled over. One mother stood up and demanded, "If you think someone in this town took those kids, say it. Otherwise, we're all just tearing each other apart." Another shouted at the mayor, accusing the town of protecting people due to local ties. The RCMP officer in attendance offered the same response they'd given for weeks. "We are following all leads. We cannot comment on ongoing aspects of the case." That night, residents began calling for outside intervention, some even suggesting the FBI or international investigators be brought in. The cost of inaction: the longer the children remained missing, the more the town seemed to decay from the inside out. Friendships dissolved. Neighbors turned cold. Long-standing business partnerships quietly ended. Church groups fractured over whether the community should still pray with the Sullivan family or for them. Local pastor James Daly tried to hold things together with a sermon titled "The Sin of Assumption," but even he admitted afterward, "I've never seen our people so afraid of each other." The breaking point then, on June 6th, a message appeared on the window of the Sullivan home, spray painted in red. "Tell the truth." Maggie called the police. No one had seen who did it. No security footage caught the act. But the incident marked a new phase. The town had moved from whispered suspicion to open hostility. RCMP increased patrols near the home. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage had been done. No longer just about the kids at some point. The focus had shifted. It was no longer just about Lilly and Jack. It was about everyone else, what they believed, who they trusted, and what they feared. The community had become a mirror of the investigation itself, fragmented, quiet, and crawling with suspicion. And as the days stretched on with no arrest, no confession, and no sign of the children, that mirror began to crack. Lansdowne was unraveling. The question no one wants to ask behind every whisper and accusation. One terrifying question lurked just beneath the surface. What if the children aren't alive? No one said it out loud. Not yet. But the possibility hung over Lansdowne like a storm cloud, silent, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Part 5. Tracing secrets, surveillance footage, DNA, and a break in the case as the investigation into the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan entered its 6th week. Days of silence and despair finally gave way to a flicker of hope and the first real movement forward for law enforcement and the shattered community. A convergence of surveillance footage, DNA evidence, and a carefully timed breakthrough transformed the search from speculative to purposeful. The video clue on May 28th, the RCMP issued a targeted request. Anyone with dashcam or surveillance footage. From April 28th through May 2nd, along Gairloch Road or in surrounding areas, was asked to come forward. This appeal followed a revelation. Lilly and Jack had been seen in public on May 1st, just one day before they vanished, captured by family, though the exact location was withheld. To preserve the investigation's integrity, an image carousel of security camera feeds began to emerge. The footage depicted a typical suburban scene, the children holding hands with parents and relatives. Their clothing and demeanor offered fresh context, anchoring them in a fixed moment of time and place, a grounding reference point for next steps. This helped investigators narrow the critical window of 24 hours in which the disappearance occurred. Trail cameras and neighborhood searching. Residents' trail camera footage, covering the days before the disappearance, was also collected by police. While it didn't reveal anything directly linked to Lilly or Jack, it provided a clearer timeline of who and what passed near the Sullivan property, down to specific make and models of vehicles. Online discussion, including a post from the r/Nova Scotia subreddit, highlighted this. They're likely looking for footage of the parents or anyone going through those woods. Not hoping to see the kids, cross-referencing license plates and timestamps allowed police to build a granular timeline of activity around the property on key days, aiding in the elimination or elevation of potential persons of interest. DNA traces and forensic search. Meanwhile, inside the RCMP National Forensic Lab in Ottawa, forensic analysts were busy examining DNA traces collected during renewed searches. One notable find, a child's sock with possible blood remnants, had been submitted for testing weeks earlier. Though lab results are being held in strict evidentiary control, sources confirm investigators are awaiting a match to either Lilly or Jack, which would mark a crucial pivot toward criminal resolution. Additionally, investigators revisited the children's bedrooms, play areas, and the sliding door area. The door was reportedly silent when opened and may have been used by the children, according to the family. Investigators collected latent fingerprints and microscopic fiber comparisons, all feeding into an expanding forensic dataset potentially capable of narrowing opportunity. Tightening the time frame, the confirmation of the May 1st sighting narrowed the window dramatically. Investigators are now focused on the period between the evening of May 1st and the early morning of May 2nd. Instead of searching for over an entire week, they were now tasked with picking apart a 12 to 18-hour span. This sharpened focus helped investigators analyze GPS data, cell tower pings, and digital footprints more effectively. They began questioning neighbors and delivery drivers specifically about movements during this compressed timeline. Even mundane activities, such as a passing truck or someone coming to pick up childcare items, were being re-examined for inconsistencies. The stepfather's cooperation throughout this phase. All eyes remained on Daniel Martel. He voluntarily undertook a polygraph test, a conspicuous gesture amid public speculation. He also provided detailed accounts of the children's clothing, the layout of the home, and the sliding doors characteristics. Statements from Martel to CTV and people underscored his willingness to assist. He launched an independent search that he invited investigators to review his phone and digital history. He insisted on a polygraph and drug screening. Although the RCMP has not officially named him a suspect, his actions and cooperation, alongside strong public scrutiny, have proved essential in ruling him out or in as an investigatory priority. A forensic crossroads. This phase marks a crucial forensic crossroads. The combination of footage linking the family to a precise date and DNA data linking physical evidence to the children. Inventory of forensic matrix that investigators can track. If the DNA from the sock is verified as from Lilly or Jack, it establishes an absolute location outside the home. The positioning of that sock could indicate directionality, forcing investigators to debate whether police are dealing with accidental separation or purposeful removal. Meanwhile, surveillance confirmed the children's presence and well-being on May 1st, shifting the investigation's breakpoint, identifying possible suspects that only appear after that time frame. The investigators' silent strategy. Despite this progress, the RCMP has maintained a news blackout. When pressed, Corporal Matthew reiterated that all tools and resources are being used, but that operational integrity prevents disclosure of details. The restraint drives a media vacuum that private investigators, bloggers, and armchair sleuths rush to fill. But the official silence is designed by police to allow forensic theory development without tip contamination or false confessions. The community watch. Meanwhile, public participation, powerful but unpredictable, has continued. Through local and national eyes, residents are reviewing personal videos, reporting anything unusual seen in hour-long snapshots from April 28th through May 2nd. Each new upload is time-stamped and geolocated, added to an emerging digital map of potential sightings. This crowd forensic effort has empowered police. Hometown witnesses know their submissions matter, and police have responded with a message reinforcement. Even the smallest detail matters. They've said in press briefings. What lies ahead as June dawns, investigators now stand at a turning point. DNA results on sock will connect evidence to location and time frame. Surveillance mapping tonight versus morning will determine when the trail goes cold. Third-party statements will be juxtaposed to digital footprints and timestamps. If forensic DNA matches, investigators may soon apply for search warrants targeting suspected locations or individuals. If no match emerges, officers may need to consider alternative scenarios: cooperative disappearance, temporary abduction, or even outdoor accidents. Hope reignited for the Sullivan family and the community. This forensic pivot brings something new. Search party could, a real break, an anchor in the swirl of uncertainty. Armed now with facts, maps, timestamps, and DNA assays, the investigation steps into a place where speculation gives way to evidence-based direction. That if investigators can link physical evidence to a location tied to a person, they not only narrow their focus, they spark the potential for a resolution, possibly vindication, or renewed search efforts. The crucible, formal charges, public reckoning, and the path forward after nearly 2 months of relentless investigation. The disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan has reached a decisive turning point. With the convergence of forensic breakthroughs, mounting public pressure, and a methodical police buildup, the case has entered its most critical phase, one marked by formal charges, community reflection, and the looming question: what happens next? DNA breakthrough. The foundation of the case. The long-awaited lab results arrived in late June. The blood on the sock discovered near the ravine 3 kilometers from the Sullivan home was confirmed to belong to Jack Sullivan. This confirmation was the first irrefutable tie between the children and a location far from the house, and signified something chilling. Jack had either been carried there, taken there, or passed through in a way investigators could no longer dismiss as incidental. With this concrete evidence, the investigation officially entered the realm of criminal action. Evidence collation and warrant execution. Armed with DNA confirmation and surveillance timestamp data, the RCMP swiftly moved to execute several meticulously planned search warrants. A remote cabin owned by a relative of Daniel Martel, located 7 kilometers from home. The cabin had never been on the radar until geoanalysis flagged it an encrypted messaging platform used by an unknown number of people in the Sullivan family circle. Investigators sought chat logs from the days leading up to the disappearance today. Vehicle registered to a person of interest whose plate had been captured on trial cams circling the property between April 30th and May 2 inside the cabin. Officers reported finding children's clothing items, soil matching the ravine area, and other materials later submitted for forensic comparison. Formal charges, a calculated move with the court's green light. The Crown laid formal charges against an individual closely tied to the family relative who had displayed suspect behavior in geo-timestamp data and whose cabin contained incriminating residue. The charges included forcible confinement, interference with custody, and endangering the welfare of children. No homicide charges were filed. Yet, owing to the lack of bodies or confirmed injury, police also obtained a production order for additional cloud backups, ensuring a full copy of chat logs could be examined for intent or coordination. The family response to charges, once announced, reverberated across Lansdowne and beyond. Maggie Sullivan issued a public statement through her lawyer, acknowledging the grief but expressing cautious hope. "We trust the process. We just want our children back, or at least the truth." Daniel Martel, visibly shaken, echoed a promise to support the investigation. Community members rallied around the couples with flowers, others with vigil candles that transformed quickly into symbols of solidarity, not suspicion. Community reckoning. Unity in crisis instead of continuing the spiral of distrust that plagued the town in earlier stages. Lansdowne community leaders chose a different path. A day of reflection event was held, not for a saint or a hero, but for dignity and collective empathy. Police, clergy, and residents gathered at the local park, lighting candles, tying ribbons, praying, or simply standing together. This moment marked a shift, from speculation to solidarity, from accusation to support. The town recognized its own fragility and its capacity for reconciliation under pressure. The legal maze, pre-trial and motion hearings, though the charges were filed, the path to resolution remains complicated. During pre-trial motion hearings, the defense has asked to suppress evidence obtained from the encrypted messaging platform, citing privacy concerns and technical irregularities in the warrant. Expert testimony is being lined up for DNA experts and digital forensic analysts to explain the significance of the link between the sock, the cabin, and the charged individual. The Crown is pushing for extended custody to preserve evidence stability and prevent tainting witness testimony. These procedural skirmishes, though legal, will shape the architecture of the coming trial and the narrative under which the truth is ultimately revealed. The missing children, ongoing search and forensics. Crucially, the court filings indicate that investigators have not ceased their search for the missing children. In the weeks following the changes, new cadaver-sniffing dogs have been brought in. Underwater forensic teams have rescanned nearby rivers and ponds. Septic tanks, wells, and tunnels in the area have been re-examined. The hope and legal imperative is to find the children or the answers to whether they're alive or not. The DNA match, while powerful, doesn't tell the full story. There's still a race against time and against decay. National attention and policy ripples. The Salisbury case has also ignited national conversation around how missing child cases with forensic promises are handled. Calls have emerged for improved surveillance camera community networks in rural areas. Forensic cryopreservation, standardized collection of DNA evidence even without bodies, has entered legislative discussions. Increased support is being discussed. 4 family liaison trained officials to guide families through the judicial maze when their children are missing. Lansdowne, once a whisper on the national map, is now a case study that may redefine protocols for child disappearance investigations in Canada. What comes next? The road ahead as formal legal proceedings begin, the focus sharpens. What to expect? Preliminary hearing, evidence thresholds will be reviewed. Will the Crown's case stand on enough foundation to proceed to trial? Further search efforts. Police enforcement will continue in parallel, even after charges, until the children's whereabouts are known. Community and fundraising. grassroots campaigns to sustain search for volunteers, therapy services, and legal aid have begun in earnest. The emotional undercurrent at the heart of all these developments. There is still a family in crisis and a community clinging to hope. Maggie and Daniel are reportedly attending counseling and maintaining limited public statements, often through intermediaries, neighbors. While weary, now offer food, comfort, and practical help, providing grocery runs, lawn mowing, and meals to support the family under their emotional burden. The town may never fully heal from this event, but the collective lineup, police, media, neighbors, judges, is now racing toward a resolution. Epilogue. A case never finished while charges have changed the status of the case from missing children to criminal investigation. The final chapter remains unwritten. If Lilly and Jack are found alive, it will be an extraordinary rescue story. Emotional, messy, triumphant that if their remains are found. The trial transforms from criminal procedure to family closure, seeking justice. Grieving loss that if no trace is ever recovered. This could become a canticle of unresolved grief, a reminder of how fragile closure can be. But now, Madonna's time of uncertainty is turning to the certainty of accountability. Wherever the journey goes, the stage and the spotlight will no longer be possible, but on justice.